Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is The Raptor, and welcome to our 10th versus matchup review video. As always, I'm more than happy to talk about various fight ideas, and I thank everybody for their participation in this. And even though I've said this over and over again, there are some people that still don't seem to pick up on it. Remember that I do not pick these matchups from the comments on these videos. Technically, I don't even pick them at all. They're determined by the activity on my community tab. So check that out, or read the description of this video to get all the details. And you can even check out previous episodes of this series to see if I've already covered something you like. But enough of all of that, let's get to reviewing. First up, Yuji Itadori versus Denji, Jujutsu Kaisen versus Chainsaw Man. It's pretty fitting to start with a JJK matchup, given what's coming up next on Death Battle, and I know these series were seen as like the two new hot anime series for a while, but frankly, they didn't really interest me at first, at least not in comparison to the relatively older anime series that I was already familiar with. However, now, and partially thanks to Death Battle, I can say that I am quite hooked on the power systems of these series, and also just the combination of them together. So much so that this has actually become one of my top 50 most wanted Death Battle ideas. You know, that video I made that I keep referencing all the time now. But for real, these characters' individual stories are all about fighting back against a sick world, a world that they didn't ask to be a part of, and how they progress through that world, you know, how the world has shaped them, and how they shape themselves. It's a very simple but effective analysis structure, and combine that with a really visually appealing and passionate animation, I think we've got an episode that is very easy to succeed. Not to mention that this matchup is so inherently different from Gojo vs. Makima in many ways that it'd be hard to say exactly how Death Battle would see the debate. You can't just look at the previous episode and know exactly how they would rule things here. There's a little more unpredictability to it. And there are more series elements that Death Battle has yet to cover, so it's not just gonna feel like a rehash. Personally, I love that. I think this is the best way to bring back a series combination like this, and we're actually gonna see some more examples of that later on in the video, but that's part of the reason why I'm so intrigued by this idea. Now, in terms of the likelihood, both Yuji and Denji have gotten some more opponents here and there, especially Denji, but let's be honest, this is probably the one they're gonna eventually end up going with, and thanks to Shigaraki versus Mahito, it might not happen for like 2 or 3 years or something like that, but it's just too easy of an anime protagonist fight to pass up on, and we know they like doing those whenever they can, so yeah, I am very confident in this one happening. Next up, Kurumi Tokisaki versus Homura Akemi, Data Live versus Madoka Magica. Now, this might come as a bit of a surprise to some people, but I've actually talked about this matchup once before on the channel. It was way back in 2023 for my Death Battle Dream Season video of that year, and back then I was basically just learning about the idea. Now though, out of all of the Kickstarter pitch matchups that I am aware of, because I don't think all of them have been revealed yet, and even if they have, I'm not aware of all of them, but out of all of them that I know, this is definitely among my favorites. I think this is such a great matchup for what Death Battle does well, you know, combining the badass sides of characters with the wacky sides of characters. If you don't really know these characters that well, the bare bones description is basically magical girls with time abilities and guns. Look me dead in the eye and tell me that that would not be amazing to see. There is a place for grounded action that could escalate into insane visuals, kind of like Ghost Rider vs. Spawn, which, side note, that was supposed to be a matchup in this video, but because it recently came out on Death Battle, it means I've talked about it a lot recently, so go check out my podcast review episode if you want to hear my thoughts on that matchup and the episode. But back on topic, this matchup just seriously has so many appeals to me in its concept alone. The only real negative I can think of is that it is more of a subversion of the magical girl trope, so it might be a bit weird for Death Battle to do this as their first magical girl fight, but out of all of them, it is still my favorite. Like, I'm not huge on Sailor Moon versus Madoka. I think it's okay, but I really just want Sailor Moon to fight Seiya instead, so I'm kind of biased against it. And there are a few alts for these characters that I've seen, especially Homura, but I still find this one the most interesting, the most fun, the one with the coolest tone. I would just really like to see it. And it is more on Death Battle's radar than ever before, thankfully. They would need to determine whether or not it's worthwhile, because I could just see them never doing this one, but I still think it has a shot for whenever they need to fill spots later on. Like, if there's an open Death Battle slot, they might throw this one in there, and I'd really like them to. Moving on, Emperor Palpatine versus Master Xehanort, Star Wars versus Kingdom Hearts, a matchup I have never, ever talked about on this channel before. Absolutely not. Now, this one is not only in my top 50, but also in my top 20 most wanted death battles. This, in my opinion, is one of the best examples of why villain fights are so good, and personally one of the reasons why I love villain fights and why I think they could be amazing on the show. It's not a perfect matchup, I'm not here to say it's perfect, but it has the personality, the visual spectacle, and the hilarious convolutedness of being a villainous mastermind all rolled into one. Their stories and abilities can easily share the spotlight in the analyses. The interaction potential in the animation is perfect, and the characters are so fun to watch. Because of all of this, I think that staying faithful to the characters, as long as you stay faithful to them, you will get an instant hit of an episode, because we just love watching these guys, and watching them fight in a death battle just makes it even better. This would be another series combination coming back to the show, and admittedly not really holding the same amount of weight as something like Yuji versus Denji, as it's not nearly as easy to argue that the debate or the dynamic would be so different from the last time. But even still, I wouldn't call this a worthless endeavor as far as specific powers and motivations are concerned. There are so many opportunities for the writing across the entire episode to make it feel so different from Yoda versus Mickey. Like when you compare Vader versus Obito to Obi-Wan versus Kakashi, even if both Vader and Obi-Wan had won, you know what I mean? It's still very different. And I still love Yoda versus Mickey. It's one of my favorite episodes of all time. So as far as Star Wars episodes or Kingdom Hearts episodes are concerned, this might be the one way to give me an episode that I like even more. So yeah, of course I want to see this episode. I really have nothing else to say about it that I haven't said somewhere else before. It's basically like another Goku Black versus Reverse Flash to me. I just really want to see it. And it does feel somewhat inevitable, like on some level. It being on DBX and Death Battle Cast and going really far in the Tournament of Champions does kind of reinforce all of the demand that Death Battle knows exists for this episode. And it's also one of the biggest Star Wars matchups left. It seems like Death Battle really likes going through those, so I don't want to say it's guaranteed. I don't like saying any episode is guaranteed, but I think this one is very likely, and I really hope it happens. After that, Spike Spiegel versus Revy, Cowboy Bebop versus Black Lagoon. This is another one of my top 50 most wanted death battles. Wow, seems like a lot of you guys were suggesting and supporting a lot of those matchups all around the same time, which is actually kind of awesome to see, but this is a bit of a unique case where not only is it a lot lower on the list, but I probably wouldn't like it even as much as I do if it wasn't for the Tournament of Champions pushing it forward. Same thing happened with Scorpion versus Wolf, where it's now in my top 15 or top 20. Sometimes that kind of thing just happens. Long story short, it's another major anime matchup that I just really respect now, and am mostly really interested in. It has a very distinct vibe that I like, you know, a lot of badass, but a little bit of chill all mixed together. I think that can make for some great banter and a great track as well. I'd be really interested in hearing what the music sounds like, and I think this is one of those episodes where it could get unfamiliar people hooked with the signature plot elements. I could see a lot of people saying, oh, I wasn't really into Cowboy Bebop before Death Battle, but then I saw this episode and now I really like it. I really think that if they do this episode well, it could really end up like that for a lot of people. Now, this is definitely a more grounded matchup, and I do not think that is bad by any means. I like grounded death battles, but it does mean that it has to be very creative in what you're looking at to make sure it doesn't get too repetitive. However, these characters are known for their signature styles of combat and weapon skills, you know, how they fight. That's the stuff I would already expect to stand out. I think it should be relatively easy to pull off, and I think it would be very entertaining to watch. And like I said earlier, this is a pretty major anime idea. To me, it feels like it very well could happen one day. They even said on the ballot banter that they will do it, but you know, who knows? We can't really take that literally. But even still, it seems very likely to me. Next up, Zim versus Crypto, Invader Zim versus Destroy All Humans. This is one of those many fight ideas where a lot of people seem to either like it or just don't know that much about it. There's not a lot of vocal backlash against it, which is probably a pretty good sign, and it's not really my expertise regarding cartoons or gaming respectively, to be honest, but it does have a general vibe or theme that I think I've come to like. Hell, I like Plankton versus Mr. Mind just for what it is, and there's definitely some overlap with this one, you know, but it's pretty funny because the concepts that come with these characters, like world domination or world destruction and all of that, would naturally be very serious subjects in universe, but for us, you know, the passive observers, it's kind of funny because it's not our world and we're just watching two funny looking aliens doing whatever the hell they're trying to do, you know? So I think that's great sources of both comedy and also genuine awe in the writing, you know, what their goals are and and what they're actually able to accomplish, and I think the fight could escalate using that as well, starting off very silly, but getting more and more serious as it goes on. I am not that familiar with the debate itself, but I will say that I could very easily see it hinging on what you decide to give one or both of the combatants, if they have stuff that may or may not be standard to them, you know what I mean? And that is a very slippery slope for me, because there are some matchups like Jimmy versus Dexter where they both have so much stuff like that, where it's actually easier. You can just give both of them everything, and you don't really have to worry about whether or not it's fair, because they both have so much stuff. And who knows, maybe it's actually very similar in this matchup, but if it applies to one character way more than the other character, then that's kind of where you lose me, because that's not really the debatability of fights that I like. I don't like where the setup of the matchup is debatable. Like, I find that really boring. Maybe it doesn't work that way. I'm just saying that that would be a concern of mine if I were to look more into this matchup, but maybe it actually works really well. And like I said earlier, there are very few matchups that I would consider like straight guaranteed for the series. There are some matchups where they may be popular and I could see them happening on the show, but I could honestly just as easily see Death Battle going the whole run without ever doing them. And this is kind of one of those matchups to me. It could happen, but it seems to be mainly popular within the Death Battle community itself, as opposed to like extending outside of that. But hey, if it did happen, I would be interested. I think it could be very fun. Moving on, Pac-Man versus Felix the Cat. This one wasn't really on my radar that much before it appeared on my community tab, to be honest. I don't really know that much about Felix as a character or as a series, and Pac-Man has definitely had more prominent talks elsewhere in this community, like, let's be fair, but I do see the angle that this matchup goes for, and I do think it is kind of nice. It gives me general Mario versus Mickey vibes as a matchup, although funnily enough, I am more inclined to root for this one to happen, as I can't side against Mickey versus Bugs. That's just me personally, and there might be a lower level of straight hijinks, but the same level of stylistic potential. Very good stylistic potential if you ask me. I think the combination of old cartoons and old video games can influence all of the directing and the choreography. It would definitely be a very unique experience. Overall, I think I can say with a lot of certainty that this is a very cute idea. This isn't something I would be actively hoping for, at least not in comparison to a lot of other ideas, but it is still inoffensive and could be a fun time. There are no big distracting or detrimental elements that break it as a matchup. It just works really well and could be a good episode. However, if Pac-Man does eventually come to the show, I think it is more likely that he will fight Luigi. I know some people don't want to hear that. That's just my personal guess for what will happen. This fight happening is not impossible, but in my opinion, they would have to really want to do it. I don't think it's publicly talked about enough right now to push it ahead of Pac-Man versus Luigi, but things do change, so maybe after enough time, it could have a better shot. After that, Mario versus Kirby, Nintendo versus Nintendo. A few years ago, I probably never would have really thought about this idea, or at least not seriously considered it. However, nowadays, I'm seeing it like everywhere. There are so many people showing their general support for it, discussing it, debating it. It's one of those matchups that's definitely gotten a lot more popular as the years have gone by. And I do think it has its appeals. I also think it is somewhat carried by how iconic the characters are and the in-game gimmicks that they have, but there's still a lot of good stuff that can come out of all of that. I do think there is lots to like. For instance, from a sheer quantity perspective, there is an insane amount of powers to work with in the animation and an insane amount of history to work with in the analyses. I really think Death Battle could play up the gaming feel of this matchup and show the evolution in that gaming world. Not just the characters and how powerful they've become, but also the games themselves, how they've improved, how they've changed. I really hope that Death Battle would focus on that kind of stuff in the analyses, because really, to me, that's what makes this matchup work. Despite all of that being said though, I should say that on a very personal level, this matchup doesn't really vibe with me all that much, and it's not because of anything the matchup does wrong. I think there's a lot of fight potential to be found here, and I don't think anyone could deny that. But as a concept, I don't know, I just find it a little basic for a matchup, I guess. I can't help but think that there are more appropriate opponents out there for both of these characters. If Death Battle were to make this into an episode, I think there's a good chance that it would turn out a really good episode. And I recognize for some people that's enough to get hooked on a matchup idea, and I totally respect that. But when it comes to legacy ideas or legacy style style ideas, I feel like it is very arbitrary. Like, it kind of just has to speak to you. Either it does or it doesn't. Like, there are some legacy style ideas out there that I quite like Naruto versus Luffy, for instance. I like that one a lot more than this one, and I could see that being true for a lot of people, but I could also see the exact opposite being true for just as many people. And I don't think either of those stances are unfair. I think they're both perfectly valid. I'll respect your opinion as long as you respect mine, you know what I mean? Like, it really just comes down to how you inherently feel. I could see this episode happening if they're not really that interested in doing Mario vs. Sonic 3. This would be a very easy way to bring back two huge video game icons, and I think this goes without saying, but them having already done Wario vs. King Dedede, I don't think rules this one out for happening. So yeah, I really do think it has a chance. And finally, we have Blaze vs. Starfire, Archie Sonic vs. DC. This is a matchup that back in the day used to really frustrate me, but for some admittedly petty reasons. I find some of the major Sonic and DC scalers can be hard to deal with sometimes, and this matchup wouldn't really give me the same amount of unfiltered hype that Flash vs. Sonic gave me when it was first announced. And I know there are some fanboys that would naturally take sides, but I also know that there are a lot of people that would automatically side against the DC character because that's what they always do, and at this point that has just gotten incredibly old. The same thing is happening with Simone versus Kyle. That's like the one thing at this point about the matchup that I do not like, just the fucking fan response to it. Like, oh my god. And now that we have the Sonic and DC crossover comic, the arguments could potentially turn up to 11, so yay. But at this point, I can say that I have mellowed out with this idea, relatively speaking, and I think it's okay. The connections seem decent. I don't think they're revolutionary or anything like that, but they are specific enough so that you can look at the idea and be like, oh yeah, it totally makes sense that these characters are being paired together. And we know Death Battle uses DC and Sonic characters a lot. Production-wise, they usually use them quite well, so this is an easy way to put them together and, you know, to utilize the standard Death Battle action. It just feels like this would be a very normal, fun episode of Death Battle with the right amount of work put into it. Now, this was specifically Archie Blaze versus Starfire, and naturally, Archie Blaze is going to be a lot more powerful than regular Blaze, and because of some of the wild scaling that you can get out of DC, yeah, I can understand wanting to employ that. However, to my knowledge, Game Blaze actually has some useful abilities, like abilities that could actually be useful against someone like Starfire potentially, that Archie Blaze does not possess, despite being more powerful generally. So I'm surprising myself to say that I might actually prefer it if Death Battle did Game Blaze versus Starfire, because I've said before that I don't really get a lot out of Death Battle using alternate versions of characters unless it really makes sense to do so, or it really doesn't make sense to use the normal version. And in this case, it does seem like using the normal version of Blaze is not unworkable, or at least not on every level. It's something I would want to think about a little bit more, but I do find it interesting that you can make a case for using either version. You usually can't do that. And yeah, I don't know if these are the DC or Sonic characters that Death Battle would want to focus on immediately. I could see them wanting to focus on other characters first, but the matchup itself has still made its mark. I'm sure Death Battle is well aware of it, and if they did decide to do it, I could see them using Archie or Game Blaze. It might depend on how much Archie they want to use, especially if they end up doing Juggernaut versus Archie Knuckles, which it seems kind of likely that they could do that one, but you know, we'll just have to wait and see. And that will conclude today's review. Thank you so much for watching. It's still crazy to me that we've done 10 of these, but I'm happy you guys tune in for them. Check the description for details on how participation in this series works, and if you want to see more stuff from me, be sure to like and subscribe. I hope everyone here has a great day, and peace out.